Welcome to my big backyard. Today we're going to take a look at the Matrix 3.3 from Buck. This is a US company, but I believe everything about this knife is coming from overseas. It's a budget knife. We'll look at some of the materials and see what I think of it, and you can be the judge and decide if this is a knife for you. Is this an everyday carry, camp carry, something for a beginner? Come on along inside with me and we'll take a closer look. Let's take a closer look at this Buck Matrix 3.3 budget folding locking knife. Specs on it, well, it's a 3.3 inch blade. I think it's about 7.5 inches long. I see on the package 3.9 ounces, so 111 grams, centimeters, well, it's about 19 centimeters long for those of us that are metric. This is 420 high carbon steel. What's that mean? Well, it is budget steel, mediocre kind of everything. So it won't rust as easily. For instance, the edge is okay for what we're going to do with it. This is a good beginner knife. It's got a thicker feel, but that might be good for a medium hand and for your first knife, especially for scouting youth, who I do a fair bit of camping with. And it's a simple blade, which that's going to make it probably better to use at the beginning. We don't have to fidget with all the little things of a Swiss Army knife, which is pretty cool and fun. But if we're learning some knife skills and knife safety, might be a beginning place to go. So definitely not something you're going to open easily with one hand. You can do it, but we don't have that thumb stud for that. There's no flipper. And those aren't super popular here in Canada. I think this blade was particularly made for Canadian Tire. I'm not seeing it anywhere else. And for the Canadian market. And we're a little risk averse for things. And we're not going to use like assist blades and switch blades and things like that. They're not even allowed. It's not so much about the blade length here, but some of the features that it's going to have. So pretty basic knife. Stainless steel with aluminum scales on there. I really do like the weight and feel in my hand for a beginning knife. I've heard people complain about the slipperiness of it, but I've got a decent amount of traction here, and that could be the size of my hand, plus that finger groove is going to help. It's a little bit of jimping or whatever you want to call that on the top here. Open it up, but it is going to be a two-hand open, I think, for most people. Pretty easy to open up, though. Don't have to struggle with that in any way. It's a clip point. I like using clip points at work because it's going to get into some of those spots where I have zip ties that are a little bit close together. I can wedge things open. Still okay strength. The thickness isn't bad. I didn't check the mil thickness on that. Got a nice sharp edge here. So even though this is stainless, I'm finding I can still strike on a ferro rod, especially around that jimping where the thumb is. It catches a decent spark. When I'm showing someone how to do that with a ferro rod, I'd recommend folding it up at first till you get used to it. But you could see some pretty good angles there. So you can scratch some material off a ferro rod, especially at the jimping. Not a lot of customization. I think this is meant more for someone who's right-handed, although you can probably operate that. I'm in my left hand, I'm not a lefty. That liner lock I'm going to have to pull up instead of push down. And that's a bit of a fiddly spot for some people. We'll talk about that in a minute. So just looking at it, probably two-hand open. You have to practice with your liner lock. It's a little stiff, but it's not so bad that I need to oil that up. So overall quality. Well, I feel like this is definitely one of those mass-produced things. But considering the price, it feels solid enough for budget material. I don't find I have another knife that I got that's very budget, very wiggly here. I don't have that issue. It feels firm. The lock feels decent. Dropped it once or twice already. Just shake it off and away you go, wipe it down. I think this is going to be easy to maintain for a beginner. And, with the steel that it has, and so that's a 3.3 inch blade as mentioned, that's 420 high carbon. Pretty easy to sharpen for a beginner. We'll open that up. It's an easy blade to sharpen in the beginning. You don't have any special grinds on here, pretty standard here. I'd say the edge, though, and we're going to test that in a minute. I haven't sharpened it yet. I've cleaned it off, been using it for 2 weeks, 3 days at camp, and then cutting some zip ties and cordage and a little bit of cardboard, opening some boxes from Amazon or whatever, and we're going to check that sharpness. I'd say I'm a fan of knives, not a knife expert, but I find the edge on this after only 2 weeks of use and no real maintenance other than wiping it. That should be cutting in already. So I can get it to go, but it's kind of tearing more than ripping by now. And that's okay. If I get the angle right, it'll get you that nice straight cut. In all fairness, it's reasonably sharp, but I don't think you get a super sharp edge on this kind of metal. I could be wrong. Let me know. I can get a good edge, but not an awesome edge. It's a sharp enough edge to still be safe. But after 2 weeks of regular usage, I'd say regular, we were doing some feather stick type stuff and shavings, chopping some veg. I chopped up some hot dogs, and again, cardboard, zip ties, and cordage. And it's okay. I'm not sure if we can see any major nicks in there. I'd have to fire that under a magnifier. But for the price, I think we did all right with the blade here. Now, the liner lock, it feels good. Yeah, no real rough spots there, but this is where I had some youth. They were kind of afraid of their liner locks. For you guys, it's the first time having a knife with a lock. Maybe you can pinch it here, feel that it releases, because you can put a bit of pressure with this hand. And once it is moving, clear your fingers from the path of the blade and give that a close. Everything's out of the way and no problem. Focusing in on the handle here, I kind of like the pattern here on that aluminum set of scale. I've never been a huge fan of a pocket clip. They grow on me. Keeps it steady in the pocket, but I have little pockets inside my pocket for that. I have a pretty big hand. I kind of like a bigger knife if I'm going to be out in the bush a bit, and I'm going to go fixed blade most of the time anyway. But for a folder, it's a 3-finger for me. Probably for a smaller youth, you could get 4 on there. It's got that finger grooving. I think it looks pretty cool. Talking about, have a look at size in the pocket. Well, I have a bigger hand. I don't know if I have bigger pockets, but I find it fits and slides in there just fine. The pocket clip holds it in place from wiggling around. What I don't actually like on my knives is the point up open, because I find sometimes I'll get a little sloppy, and if there's no spring, and there isn't on this one, you can kind of open up and you're reaching down at it. So I'd rather be able to fold the clip this way, but there could be other challenges with that. I do have a pocket with a zipper that I can slide stuff into. I just want a blade that's going to stay closed. This does pin it in place. It's not so big for me that it blocks me from grabbing at my wallet or keys or something, but it's not super small. I have other knives that are less noticeable. It's definitely bigger than a pen knife, but I actually like that feel. The weight isn't too heavy. I think it's 3.9 ounces. I mentioned that earlier, so 111 grams. I'm not counting that sort of stuff. Light enough to not be too bad, and it's not pulling my pants off because there's too much weight in my pocket. I had to cut tests with the paper, and for me on the weekend, it worked okay doing the shavings of wood. It had a nice draw to it, good feel. I had a good angle here when I was striking a ferro, even though that was stainless. There's enough sharp angles on that jimping. It was throwing a spark fairly well. Yeah, so it worked well for me for those simple camp tasks. Chopped vegetables just fine. And if I needed to poke a hole in something to thread, say, a cordage piece through something, that tip did okay. And it's done zip ties fine here at work. So bang for your buck. Well, at $42, don't buy it. You can get a better knife. When it's on sale at $26, I think it's reasonable. You can get it for $15 or $12. That's awesome. I'd pick one up. It's a nice little folding locking knife. It's going to last a little while, and it's a great starter knife. Looks all right, too, in my opinion. Thanks for coming along with me back out in the big backyard to wrap this one up. This is the Matrix 3.3 budget knife. Tell me what you think in the comments below. Hit the like button, subscribe, share, remix, and go out and make your own videos. I love watching that stuff. If you do, pop it in my comments and I'll go follow the link. So overall quality, well, I feel like this is definitely one of those mass-produced things. But considering the price, it feels solid enough for budget material. But I find the edge on this after only 2 weeks of use and no real maintenance other than wiping it. That should be cutting in already. So I can get it to go, but it's kind of tearing more than ripping by now. And that's okay. If I get the angle right, it'll get you that nice straight cut. In all fairness, it's reasonably sharp. So bang for your buck. Well, at $42, don't buy it. When it's on sale at $26, I think it's reasonable. You can get it for 15 or 12. That's awesome. I find the edge on this after only 2 weeks of use and no real maintenance other than wiping it. That should be cutting in already. So I can get it to go, but it's kind of tearing more than ripping by now. And that's okay. If I get the angle right, it'll get you that nice straight cut.